Cuba had load shedding last week. Cuba's falling apart. Cuba is a socialist country. East Germany and West Germany, Venezuela, North Korea. I mean, you look at these countries that have adopted socialist policies where the government controls most economic decisions and almost all the property and assets in the country, failures. But the greatest heroes on this planet are people like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Richard Branson, Rupert Murdoch, Johann Rupert. I can go on and on and on. Extraordinary business people who, in most cases, like Steve Jobs, from nothing, built extraordinary business empires. And they should be the people we build statues about. If you look at Saru, these are all administrators. They're not business people. If you look at our cabinet, how many business people are there? Now, Gwede Mantashe pretends that he is a business person because for 8 years he worked, embarrassingly, at Angloval Mining, where he learned his mining practice. But he's a member of the Communist Party, a published member of the Communist Party. What a moron. I mean...
Yeah, guys, so today Rob Hersov is actually talking about one of my most favorite areas in philosophy, and that's the area of ideology, the isms that have governed the world. And so today he's expounding on why capitalism works for South Africa and socialism would not work. And we know that this is in light of a progressive caucus, the presence of a progressive caucus in place, ready to kick the GNU or ready to kick out proponents of capitalism and, with the propagation of the whole thing with, white monopoly capital and all that, ready to infuse socialism and establish a socialist discourse for the nation of South Africa. Many people have said that will cause a capital flight. Many things will break down. But at the same time, a lot of people argue that Russia and China is now actually taking a lot of weight, especially with South Africa now being a member of BRICS. And so even with the capitalist flight that might occur if socialism, especially with the power of the progressive caucus, with the like of the MK coming to the fore at the moment, if that comes to the fore, that China and Russia would be able to fill in the gap that the capitalists in South Africa have actually entrenched, and built South Africa upon today. So let's listen to what Rob Hersov thinks about socialism and capitalism and why capitalism is the right ideology to drive development in South Africa. And I'll be back for some really powerful analysis on an article, the same article which he has actually published on Biz News that goes in depth to explain all that he's been talking about in this video.
Capitalism. Capitalism works, socialism doesn't. You spent a bit of time thinking about that, and then you wrote a piece that we published yesterday with a fabulous cartoon, by the way. And the thrust of that is really to try and perhaps help with the education process, financial education process. And you go back to 1989, at which time the end of history. Capitalism won, socialism didn't. We saw what has happened subsequent to that. Socialism's made a huge comeback, maybe by those who don't have long memories. So you have to start the process, the education process, all over again, I presume.
100%. After the Second World War and after the Cold War, socialism had clearly failed. Socialism and communism were defunct, evil, destructive systems, and everybody knew it. And capitalism was the only way forward and a huge success. And it was just too clear to everyone. And here we are, decades later, and young people still believe socialism hasn't been tried properly. And it's been communist and leftist propaganda that has infiltrated our institutions of learning, our universities and our schools, where teachers and professors are saying socialism hasn't been tried properly. And it's ludicrous. And about 4 years ago, I was walking through the V&A Waterfront Mall, and there was a Vodacom pop-up, group of students wearing Vodacom shirts, handing out pamphlets and everything. And I walked up and I said, "This is great. This is capitalism on display." And this one student said to me, female, she said, "No, we don't believe in capitalism." I said, "What?" She said, "Well, socialism hasn't been tried properly." And I went, "This is extraordinary. Where did you learn this?" "At the UCT." And, I mentor a number of young, mainly black, mainly males, who sort of ask, "Will you spend time mentoring me?" And it's not a scalable project, but I do take on people I like. And Jabu, you know Jabu. He's like a younger brother now. And all of them have been told socialism hasn't been tried properly. And no one has read about the invisible hand. No one's read Adam Smith. No one's actually spent the time, had the opportunity, or in school and university been given both options and shown the facts out in the outside world. And look at the facts are very simple. Cuba and Florida, they're, a couple of 100 miles apart. Cuba had load shedding last week. Cuba's falling apart. Cuba is a socialist country. Florida is booming. East Germany and West Germany. Venezuela, North Korea. You look at these countries that have adopted socialist policies where the government controls most economic decisions and almost all the property and assets in the country, failures. If you look at the happiness index of the country where people would most like to have been born, and the top 10, every single one of them is a capitalist country. The countries that have the innovation index, all of them are capitalist. All the facts show clearly capitalism works and socialism doesn't. And yet, people believe socialism hasn't been tried properly. It's devastating and it's terrifying.
But I guess it's also a challenge. It's a challenge to unwind a lot of the nonsense that certain people who grab hold of young minds can put into those minds. And I suppose if that's what you learned and that's what your university required you to write in your thesis, if you didn't, you would not get through it. You would not get past. And how does one, from your side, when you talk to a guy like Jabu or some of the others that you mentor, some of the other people you mentor, where do you start in explaining that perhaps the foundation of their knowledge is not on very strong grounds?
So when you go to children's, younger children's school and you ask them what they want to do in life, what careers they want, they go fireman, pilot, to nurse and whatever. It's all professional jobs because their little brains can understand that. But unfortunately, when you go to, the broader population and say, who are your heroes? What statues would you put up? It's generally politicians or regulators or people like that. It's not business people. But the greatest heroes on this planet are people like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Richard Branson, Rupert Murdoch, Johann Rupert. I can go on and on and on. Extraordinary business people who, in most cases, like Steve Jobs, from nothing, built extraordinary business empires. And they should be the people we build statues about. Now, I get it. Winston Churchill, saved Europe from us all speaking German or being burned in ovens. But there are business people that should have statues put about them who have created extraordinary things in our lives and changed our lives for the better. We need to start lauding, and BizNews does this, broader than this. We need to start lauding and praising business people. Elon Musk, South African born, richest man in the world, one of the greatest entrepreneurs, has created Tesla, SpaceX, Starlink. That's a real hero. And we need to be promoting business heroes.
It's if you were to take the market value of just Tesla and you compared that with the South African economy, it would stagger people in South Africa that Tesla's worth more than all the money we spend in a year in this economy. So it's quite extraordinary. We're going to talk to Kevin Lings later about the latest. We're going to talk to a little bit later to Kevin Lings about the latest developments that we've seen on the mini budget, and I hope that we get some insights there from Kevin that the government is moving in a different direction. But Rob, we also saw this week that the Competition Commission has stepped in and has blocked Vodacom's proposed investment into a company called Massive. We also saw this week that it has blocked the proposed takeover by Sun International of Piermont Casinos. Pete Viljoen yesterday said this is because it's run by socialists. They don't actually understand capitalism. What's your take on that?
He's 100% right. If you look at SARU, these are all administrators. They're not business people. If you look at our cabinet, how many business people are there? Now, Gwede Mantashe pretends that he is a business person, because for 8 years he worked, embarrassingly, at Angloval Mining, where he learned his mining practice. But he's a member of the Communist Party, a published member of the Communist Party. What a moron. I mean, how can you have a minister of mines who claims he's been in business, is still a member of the Communist Party? It's just muddled thinking at the highest level. And there are too many lawyers, too many regulators, too many bureaucrats, too many administrators, and not enough business people making decisions. You know, all my in-laws are lawyers in New Zealand, and I've launched Pacific Paddle, a paddle business in New Zealand. It's taken over a year, and we still don't have one court up yet. Now, we've signed some of the best leases in New Zealand, to the credit of our CEO there. He's been incredibly entrepreneurial. But you've got to get 20 different reports to build a paddle tennis court. It's not a 100-story building. It's a paddle tennis court. And New Zealand's overregulated. South Africa's overregulated. And unfortunately, what government attracts are regulators, lawyers, bureaucrats, not wealth creators. It's the wrong way around. I'd like to see way more business people like Elon Musk. If Trump wins, and I hope Trump wins, Elon Musk will be in charge of productivity and efficiency in government. I mean, isn't that a beautiful thing? And we need more of that. So we're on the back foot as capitalists, and we need to be back on the front foot again. We need to be promoting the fact that capitalism works and socialism doesn't.
Yeah, brilliant, guys. What do you think? So we'll just go quickly into the analysis and try to really understand a deeper perspective of what Rob Hersov means, and try to situate his analysis in the history, the larger macroeconomic, macro history of the world, in terms of how socialism have actually collapsed in many states and how capitalism still seems to be propping up development in many countries today. So BizNews has this really interesting article written by Rob Hersov himself, where he says that capitalism, marked by private ownership and free market competition, has proven to drive innovation, prosperity, and personal freedom. In contrast, socialism, with its state ownership and centralized planning, often results in economic inefficiency, scarcity, and oppression. Evidence from the Heritage Index and Legatum Prosperity Index shows that the freest, most capitalist nations are also the wealthiest and most prosperous. Rob Hersov goes on to say that history reveals that capitalism as a path to growth and choice. History reveals capitalism as a path to growth and choice, while socialism limits freedom and frequently leads to hardship. So that's the introduction Rob gives. So Rob Hersov now says that while socialists deride capitalism as a heartless system that enables poverty, it is socialism that has led to the death of over 100 million people through starvation and violence, and the poverty of countless millions more. One of the popular examples to this is many thinkers have argued about, the elimination of over, I think, 70 million, Russians during the time of the Soviet Union under, under the likes of Joseph Stalin, where it was usually argued that I don't know where that illustration is anyway, but there was an illustration where he actually gave his governance philosophy, and he took a chicken and defeathered that chicken, and the pain with taking out the feather of the chicken, so that much pain, the chicken kept screaming and expressing that pain. But after defeathering the chicken completely, and yes, I think I got this story from one of my favorite Christian apologists, Ravi Zacharias. He spoke about how after defeathering that chicken, he placed the chicken on the floor and gave that chicken, so I think, some grains or cereals to eat, and the chicken, kept following him as he dropped that, bread or something like that on the floor. That chicken kept, following him and eating, despite it being defeathered by its, by Joseph Stalin himself. So he argued that this is the nature of people and society, that if you starve or, oppress people, just like this chicken in the terms of the defeathering, and you give them food to eat, they will follow you all the days of your life. So this was an illustration from Ravi Zacharias. He's late now, but he spoke about this and about probably this might have been the ideology of the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin at the time. And we know that the Soviet Union was really one of the proponents of communism, and especially from the 1917 Russian Revolution down all the way to now being a proponent of what might be the softer type of communism, which is socialism. But now Rob Hersov actually argues that socialism have never worked. So let's keep on going further. So Rob Hersov says that capitalism is a system in which property is owned by private individuals or companies and where private enterprise compete in a free market with little government interference, while socialism is where all property is owned by the state and that the economy is centrally planned by bureaucrats. Almost all enterprise is owned and run by the government. So this is what socialism is, according to Rob Hersov. So Rob Hersov goes on to say that many countries combine a bit of both. South Africa has capitalist aspects as people still own their property, and there exists a semblance of a market where companies compete. But the government also owns many large companies, such as Eskom, and actively interferes in the economy with pervasive regulations. Now, Hersov goes on to say that despite what many politicians and pseudo-intellectuals may have us to believe, the more capitalist a country, the richer and freer it becomes. Conversely, socialism erodes people's freedoms and has historically led to mass poverty and death, and so the facts prove it. So he goes on to say on the next section of his article, he argues that, the freer the market, the richer the country. Of the 10 most capitalist countries, according to the Heritage Index, which measures economic freedom, 6 are also in the top 10 richest countries by GDP per capita. 5 of the freest economies are also in the top 10 most prosperous countries, according to the Ligatom Prosperity Index in 2024, which measures the quality of life, healthcare, education, personal freedom, safety, and security. Now, all the richest and most prosperous countries score well on the Heritage Index. Now, he goes deeper into some examples. He argues that Singapore and Taiwan lead the way in economic growth and innovation, especially, he says Switzerland leads in innovation, all right? While other capitalist countries like Switzerland, New Zealand, Estonia, and others are famously prosperous and they enjoy a high quality of life. He goes on to say that contrary to popular misconception, Nordic countries like Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and Norway are not socialist, and they rank as some of the most capitalist countries in the world, leveraging their free market policies to make life better for their people. And I really like this point he speaks about, because you see, I actually tour a lot of the Nordic states, from Sweden to Denmark to Finland, and really see that although these states manage a sort of like what has been called a welfare state that might be easily thought to be based on a socialist foundation, these countries are also really capitalist in their outlook. They're really open for business. They really, you see, even in the Ezulwini consensus that was actually written as a basis for the African Union's verge into the future, along with Agenda 2063, we see that many of the Nordic states in their cooperation with many African countries really also want to have cooperation in terms of business, in terms of the companies, how to, cooperate in terms of climate change and, education and all that. So these nations might be, they might have some parts of the economy that actually operate with a socialist dogma, socialist platforms, but they are really capitalists also in their outlook. And I thought that was a really interesting one. Rob Hersov then goes on to say that, on the other hand, socialist countries consistently rank as the worst places to live. North Korea is a totalitarian police state. Venezuela and Zimbabwe have seen their economies become the worst in the world after the adoption of socialist policies, and Cuba is stuck in time, unable to grow or prosper, with load shedding, their newest socialist service non-delivery. This has little to do with sanctions and everything to do with their refusal to allow economic freedom for their people. Now, Rob Hersov goes on to the next section. He says that capitalism is informed by reality. He argues that economies are based on countless signals that inform choices, and that if the supply of a good is down, the prices go up to control its consumption. And I think I like that point. I also want to get it stuck in my head, because Rob Hersov is really good in terms of business and this thing. So he's worthwhile to learn from. So he says, if the supply of a good is down, the price goes up to control its consumption. If the supply of a good is down, the price goes up to control its consumption. Brilliant. So he argues that if more people want something, the price also goes up. This is the best rationing mechanism possible for ensuring that scarce resources are not overconsumed while incentivizing their production. All of this is done almost automatically, and it is all informed by the choices that humans make in the market. So we know that capitalism is a mechanism that's also really governed by this really complex phenomenon which we call the market. The market hasn't really been understood by anyone. The market, it's really, you really do not understand it, but it controls, it has this, pluses and minuses based on people's choices that then govern the prices and quantity and quality of things, of goods and services. And having that understanding and really functioning within that understanding, allowing competition to really govern the way the market informs prices and of commodities and their availability, is what Rob Hersov actually argues that capitalism might be used to strengthen our society. But on the converse, he says that socialism lacks this price mechanism. Socialism relies on central planners to thumb stock quotas, values, and supply and demand figures. There are no independent economic actors to generate signals under socialism, and so central planners are left in the dark. Rob Hersov argues that this can lead to shortages of certain resources. And in communist China, for example, he argues that central planners redirected mass amounts of food from rural areas to urban areas as the production numbers were falsified by corrupt officials seeking promotion. Now, he argues that this led to starvation across China, eventually killing a conservative estimate of 30 million people within the 1960 and 62. I think this was the time of the great, famine under Mao Zedong. Rob Hersov now goes on to say that capitalism enhances choice and freedom. He argues that in capitalism, he argues that in socialism, there is one provider. Consumers don't have a choice between different brands or products. They get what they are mandated to receive by the government. But in capitalism, choice is abundant. As consumers, we can choose between hundreds of different brands, all with various flavors, advantages, disadvantages, perks, and appeal. If one product disappoints us, we can always try another. So this is what Rob Hersov argues is one of the beauties of capitalism, in that it allows choice, you see, which is a really foundational aspect, foundational emotional expression of all human beings, that idea of choice to flourish. That's what capitalism does. But on the converse, he argues that socialism doesn't do that, because there's one central provider that actually streamlines everyone's choice to one particular line of action or want. Rob Hersov then goes on to say that, the freedom of choice is not just represented in purchasing a different brand of cereal over another, but in enabling individuals to choose what school they want to educate their children, which healthcare provider they want to care for them, and ultimately how they want to live their life. Capitalism is the most democratic of systems because it allows people to choose how they want to live their life and constantly vote with their money. It is no wonder that socialism always results in tyranny, as the complete control over the economy enables dictators to rule over everyone, stripping them of choice and freedom. While capitalism may lead to income inequality on paper, socialism guarantees the inequality of elites and those they oppress. Rob Hersov then goes on to say that competition leads to excellence. And I really love this point because I truly love this point. Let's just go further. He says that one of the fundamental virtues of capitalism is that it requires companies to constantly compete for success. That's where the beauty of capitalism lies. But also, many people argue that that's where its Achilles heel also lies. But at the end of the day, excellence is something that really drives the beauty of really these advanced societies we see in the world. I love that word, excellence. Those of us who are Christians, we really speak about how there was a time when it was said that Daniel was actually chosen above the president because an excellent spirit was found in him. So this whole idea of excellence, I think, being the fact that getting to learn from Rob Hersov now that excellence is embedded within the idea of capitalism. He's actually arguing that, capitalism in itself would be that vehicle that actually drives excellence and then really proves that some societies are really worth investing in and drives a certain quality of the people. It actually dictates the kind of qualities of people you find in a society compared to another. Rob Hersov then goes on to say that excellence, this whole idea of the presence of excellence, giving companies the capacity to compete for success, drives innovation, and it also drops prices to perform. It drives companies to innovate and drop their prices, and also to perform better, and also do all that they can to deliver the best product or services to their customers. But in socialism, he says that there's only one entity. As we can see with monopolies like Eskom, without competition, there's no incentive to perform better, do a better job. So socialism, at the end of the day, inevitably leads to mediocrity and failure, as there's no driving force to keep it performing well. So in his conclusion, Rob Hersov concludes saying that capitalism works, socialism doesn't. He says that capitalism breeds success, innovation, and enables freedom, while socialism is lost without price signals, and inevitably leads to shortages, tyranny, and death. The freer a country's economy, the richer it becomes. And the more we embrace capitalism, the better our society becomes. Capitalism works, socialism kills. So these are some really interesting thoughts on capitalism. But I know there have been many thinkers across the world that have actually argued that capitalism has been the destroyer of the world. It has actually increased the inequality between the haves and the have-nots. It's actually the basis of this principle of the 1% in society, because there's a narrative that says that, I think even in Namibia, I think I shared a video that it says that 10% of the people control about 80% of the wealth in Namibia. South Africa also the same. I think there's a minority controlling a large amount of that. And so people have blamed capitalism as a result of that. But also when you think of the converse at the same time, in terms of freedom, in terms of historical examples of the manifestations of socialism, and I might be wrong, but many times I've actually also observed countries that actually practice socialism. They haven't really ended well, and I really don't know. And probably from a perspective of Africa, coming from an Africanist perspective, I remember when Kwame Nkrumah, the Ghana's first president, actually, tried to propagate socialism, scientific socialism, as it was called in Ghana at the time. Many Ghanaians are still rooted today in deep doctrines of socialism and socialist theories, you see, and there was a lot of development going on in his rapid industrialization period from 1960 to 1966. I think there was this 6 or 7 year plan to really industrialize Ghana in a speed that was unbecoming. And it was really going well. But towards 1966, he was ousted in a military coup, because then the capitalist mechanisms sort of like then created a kind of like a state where it appears that he had to be the only driver, so to speak, of development. And because of what Rob Hersov argues here, that socialism entails this one entity. So Kwame Nkrumah kind of like saw himself as being, the one who understood. He had this really large vision for Ghana, but it appears that there was no effective communication among the Ghanaians at the time. And, people slowly started to feel that he was slowly becoming a dictatorial in his mandates, and so to speak. And so at the end of the day, he was ousted in a military coup. Jerry Rawlings also tried at the same in the 1980s in Ghana at the time, and the likes of the Provisional National, Defense Council, where he tried to really spearhead a populist revolution in 1980s in Ghana. It was supposed to be initially a socialist revolution, but at the end of the day, he observed that most of the proponents of socialism at the time were only sort of like propagating empty theories, and there wasn't really pragmatic means of generating income, trying to drive development and that dynamism that the economy needs. And so he switched towards the structural adjustment programs that was now really sponsored by the IMF and the World Bank. And then Ghana then slowly became what today is now being seen as a mid-income country. But what I'm trying to highlight is that most of the experiments that were done with socialism in Ghana and many African countries as well really didn't go too well. You see, and so I don't know if maybe many African countries might need to find a healthy divide between how much the state controls and how much the private sector can control, and really function within that divide. But I don't know. That's where I'll be stopping for this video. What do you guys think about Rob Hersov's speech here and the analysis? Share your thoughts. Let's learn from everyone. Let's all learn together. Share your thoughts in the comments.